Cheers.
Cheers, my darling.
Thank you for being on Steal My Sermon.
You're welcome. Are we on?
We're getting there.
Okay.
Okay, so welcome to a mini episode of Steal My Sermon. Today we're going to discuss All Saints Sunday, and we are here with the one, the only, the Reverend Eric Holloway,
Who
also happens to be my betrothed.
I think we're a little past betrothal.
Does that mean
at this
engaged?
Point. Yeah,
Okay.
it does. I
Never
have pledged you my troth.
Okay,
At this
my
point.
husband.
Yeah.
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 So Eric, tell us briefly where you are in the church world.
Yeah, so I am a priest and a rector here in San Antonio, Texas. I am the rector of St. Margaret's Episcopal Church, which is a nice sort of pastoral-sized church up in the northeast corner of San Antonio. It's a really, really great church, and I love it, as you know, and just super friendly, full of great people. So,
Are you ready?
Yeah.
I'm Alex Holloway.
And I'm Eric Holloway.
And you're invited to
Steal My Sermon.
Okay, so because we're doing a mini episode this week, we're not going to go as deeply into each reading. We're just going to dive right into the preaching part. So,
Great.
Eric, you're preaching All Saints.
Yes.
Tell us, what are you preaching?
Well, basically, I'm preaching this year. Our All Saints Sunday falls on the same Sunday as the kickoff of our fall stewardship campaign. And so that's a normal thing to be around All Saints, but I'm supposed to preach a sermon on stewardship, on the theology of stewardship, to kick that off, and that fell on All Saints. And so I'm kind of combining both of those, both the celebration and that theology. So I had a sort of unique challenge to tie those both in together. And basically that's what I'm preaching on. I'm preaching on how being a saint, how sainthood and the saints in their example to us show us a theology of stewardship, basically, and the practice of it as well. Of course, stewardship, if you haven't read the Episcopal Church's website on it, which I did recently, is the theology of it is basically seeing all that is and all that we have and all the gifts that we're entrusted with as gifts from God, and then acting accordingly. And that is in our readings as well, like in our psalm. Our psalm starts off, the earth is the Lord's and all that is in it. And so that's where I get to eventually with the stewardship piece. But I kind of just go and preach a good All Saints sermon first.
But you bring in the psalm?
Use the psalm to tie in the stewardship at the end there.
Okay, so tell us the connection between, like, we've got an idea of how you understand stewardship.
Yeah.
How are you connecting that specifically to the holy day that is All Saints Day?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, kind of got to go back and just tell you the All Saints angle I'm taking this year, which is I'm starting off the sermon really just drawing out the diversity of saints that we have, that we celebrate. At St. Margaret's, we do a midweek Eucharist, and every week we're celebrating, I pick a saint's day that we celebrate, either that's on that day or close to it, if there's not like a major feast or whatever in the week. And so we talk about saints all the time, and I really like it. I've really loved the last couple of years, just all these different saints. And so they're really, really distinct. You know, this week we celebrated St. Alfred the Great, who was the greatest king of England, the only one with the title the Great. And then a few weeks ago we celebrated St. Francis of Assisi, who was a rich boy who gave everything up to become a beggar. We have, we celebrated last year, and hopefully we will again this year too, C.S. Lewis, who's like a newer one that we're recognizing as a saint, who was like an author, a writer, an intellectual, a college professor, sort of lived a life of the mind. And then we celebrate, St. Ignatius of Antioch, or Peter, or Paul, who like died bloodily in the early centuries 2,000 years ago. So like the saints are really, really different. And I kind of draw that out to start the sermon off, and to draw people's attention to that fact. And I used the images from Revelation, the New Testament reading that we have this year, which is where Jesus is wiping everyone's tears and bringing in those images of like all the different kinds of saints who are gathered in the book of Revelation, the martyrs, the kings throwing their crowns, the prophets, the great multitude of people who are there to see the new kingdom come into being. So that's where I start off, and I kind of ask the question, like, what is it that draws all these people together? Because they live profoundly different lives. Obviously they're all Christians, but what is the actual thing that makes them part of this category we call the saints to celebrate on All Saints' Day?
That kind of reminds me of Paul talking about, though we are one body, we have many members, and like that each person has a different purpose or gift, and that kind of makes me think, like, is that part of what you're tying into stewardship too? Is like, all these saints had, like you say, really different lives and gifts, but they all gave their whole lives for Jesus.
Yes.
Similarly, like, every member of the church is called to give of their time, talent, and treasure differently. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So, like, that's how we discover what our gifts are, is like, how can we make our lives a sacrifice, see everything that we have as a gift from God, including our inborn talents, including the ways that we see the patterns that we discern over a long Christian life of like, or a short one in case some of the martyrs, of like the way the Holy Spirit uses us. All those we see as gifts from God, and we want to use them appropriately, not as just things for ourselves, but for the sake of the world, for the sake of the kingdom. And sort of the way that I get there is, I say, I bring it back after sort of giving that image of like, oh, these are very, very different people we're remembering today. What ties them together? We go back to the readings, and the through line of all the readings, except for the Psalm, which comes in for stewardship at the end, really is death being swallowed up, death being no more. So we have the Isaiah reading, where all of God's people on the mountaintop, and death like a shroud will be taken away. The Revelation reading, which is, and death shall be no more, he'll wipe every tear. And then the gospel reading, which I love so much, is the raising of Lazarus from the dead. So it's Jesus coming in. It's the one place, it's Jesus' sort of lowest point in his ministry before he actually goes to his own cross. And it's also his highest point in that it's like the pinnacle miracle that Jesus performs in John, raising his friend Lazarus from the dead. And the low point, of course, is like he weeps. It's the time when he openly weeps. So it's sort of like a mini cross and resurrection, but not for himself, for someone else. And so it's one of the last miracles he does too before he goes to his cross. So the good news that I kind of want to proclaim as part of the All Saints thing is that like when Jesus shows us what resurrection life is, he does it himself. He goes to the cross. He shows us the kind of sacrifice, the kind of loving gift of himself that he makes to the whole world. And then the result of that, the other side of that, the resurrection that comes out of living in a way that is basically dying to self. And so he does that and is exalted in the resurrection, gives us a preview of the resurrection life. And we celebrate that, of course, in the spring with Good Friday and Easter. I kind of think that All Saints is a mirror of that in the fall, which is celebrating the saints who themselves die to self and show us the resurrection life in each of their very, very different contexts. So like the way that I tie that together is Jesus previews with Lazarus the fact that it's not just him who's going to like die and be raised up, but like all of us. He says to Martha, I think, in the John reading, did I not tell you that, as he's crying basically, did I not tell you that if you believed you would see the glory of God? The glory of God, as St. Irenaeus says, is a living human being. And then he calls out Lazarus from the tomb. Lazarus jumps out and bound up in his linen, and reading ends with him saying, unbind him, release him from death. Again, Isaiah, Revelation, like swallow up death. So where it comes back to the saints is obviously the core of every, of the good news is Jesus dying and dying for us so that we can be included, and then rising up. And the way that All Saints continues that good news is saying, it's not just Jesus who lives the resurrection life. That resurrection life, and it's not just at the end of life, after we die. Like the good news of Jesus is really that resurrection life that we get glimpses of in Isaiah and Revelation invades our current life by dying to self daily. And so that's why we lift up those saints. That's what brings them all together, is like they lived that life of the cross, of taking up their daily cross. And so through that, life started to swallow up death even while they were still alive. And that's really what a saint is. And so that's sort of, saints are different. Jesus swallows up death, or swallows up death with the resurrection life through his self-sacrifice. All saints display that resurrection life by offering themselves over and over again. And then that's when it ties into like, okay, so if that's what ties them together, what's the actual practice? Where does the rubber hit the road? How do we live that resurrection life? Because we're all called to be saints, not just Alfred the Great, Francis of Assisi. We're all called, baptized into our own sainthood. And that is the practice of stewardship. It's the practice of seeing everything as a gift from God, and so being able to hold it loosely and give it up, right? Like some saints can, just go and die, actually physically. Those are the martyrs. We're not all so lucky, so, but they do that in an extreme way all at once. But we're all called to live sort of that life of martyrship, where it's like, yeah, this cup of tea, it's mine, but it might need to go somewhere else. And so like being able to just give up anything at any time for the sake of the kingdom is like a martyrdom of sorts. So
that reminds me of this great story from Father Greg Boyle, who I quote all the time. And yeah.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember which of his books this is from, but I'm pretty sure it's from Tattoos on the Heart. Mm-hmm. When he had the idea to start Homeboy Industries, they didn't have a space for it. It started, I think, with just some classes for ex-gang members or people released from prison, but they didn't have any room. And there was an order of nuns living on his parish property, and he had called a meeting of them and just asked, do you think y'all could move out so that we can have this space? And he said it took 10 seconds. They looked at each other and they said, sure. And that is, how amazing is that?
That's awesome.
It wasn't some committee, it wasn't some I guess, are you gonna use it well? They're just okay. That reminds me of that holding loosely of just, that's what we're called to.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, absolutely. That's just a beautiful thing. It almost made me tear up a little bit. I knew you were going to try and make me cry on here, but
it's not
I
hard.
didn't think you were going to. Yeah, I guess not. Some nuns did something sacrificial once. You know me too well. But yeah, no, that's, to me, that's what, when we talk about stewardship, immediately we think about tithing or giving to the church or volunteering, stuff like that. But that's really the theology of stewardship, is those practices are just there to get us in that right mindset or put our heart where our real treasure is, so that when something comes along, it's you know exactly what to do. And that's why it's important to give and all that stuff. Actually, I think the real image I use once I get to that stewardship section, just to sum it up there, of doing it is candy tithing that kids do, because it's Halloween, and so kids too can take 10% of their candy, and a lot of parents I've heard practice this, and kids really like it. It's we're gonna give away 10% of their candy, and they can be oh, are you willing to give away the Reese's peanut butter cup, which is the king of all candy? like the first fruits to some, are going to give some of that away, or just all the candy corn, which is terrible. I know you disagree with me, but it's the bottom rung of candy. Comment in the section below about whether or not you think candy corn is trash candy. But that's the image. It's like, it's all about that process of learning to see, I didn't make this candy. Like, this was all a gift. So I should give some more. That should be the natural thing that we want to do. It's not the natural thing that we want to do as humans, but it can become like the second nature, and like that's what God.
Practical question: where do these kids give their candy? Because aren't all the kids getting candy on Halloween?
All right, very knowing question there. Why don't you tell me, because I forget. So there is like a nonprofit that will actually collect that candy if you want to encourage the kids in your parish to do this. And it'll send it to troops serving overseas and stuff like that. But if you Google it, you can probably find like a bunch of different ways to like use that candy well. I was just going to tell the kids at my parish to give it to the office, and don't worry, we'll take care of it. But I guess, for the troops as well.
Troops,
the troops. Again, it's not really so much about like where it goes. I mean, it is important where it goes. Obviously, we're gearing up for stewardship season. It would be nice to like be able to pay our salaries and all that kind of stuff. And it's a beautiful thing that's how churches run, based on the sanctity of others, like the willingness of others to hold loosely the gifts of God that God has given them and share. It's a crazy thing. Mm-hmm. That's not always true in every country. There are lots of countries where the church is still established, and so people just pay taxes. But I think stewardship's almost like the opposite of taxes. It's like things you can give because you want to, instead of someone forcing you to do it. But anyway.
One thought that I had was it would be cool to bring in a local saint, like wherever you are.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about Artemisia Bowden, Dr. Artemisia Bowden, who was recently added to Holy Women, Holy Men from West Texas, and she's the only one from the Diocese of West Texas.
Yeah, well, you should tell our viewers about who that is.
Well, so Dr. Artemisia Bowden, she started a sewing school called St. Philip's that has blossomed and grown into a college that still is thriving today. And she also started St. Philip's Episcopal Church, which is also thriving today. So she was a really amazing woman and really important in the history of San Antonio.
And she was really cool.
Yeah. So I think bringing up, and there are saints from all over the country, so bringing up someone who might be more local to you can be kind of an interesting way to help people see, like, oh, I don't necessarily have to be St. Francis or, Mary or something like that. Like, I could use my sewing skills and my teaching skills for the glory of God. Yeah,
big time. I think that's so key on All Saints' Day. And like, I know traditionally the church separates out All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day to sort of cover everyone who isn't necessarily a canonized saint, but like, I think it's really key on All Saints' Day to really remind people too, like, I don't want to say all Christians are saints in the sense of like moral exemplars or anything like that, because that's for sure not. And if you start looking at the canonized saints, you see that's not the case with all of them either, at least through their entire lives. But really just reminding people, like, this life is for everyone. This is the standard basic life of our baptism that the saints are showing us how to live. And it's like, God may not raise up every single Christian as like a light to the entire world, like Mother Teresa or something like that, but like, you still have a light, and it's not to be put under a bushel. It can light up your whole house. It can light up your city. It can light up your neighborhood. Like, it's a cool thing.
Speaking of baptism, there are probably a lot of people doing baptisms on All Saints. Our
yes.
baby girl was baptized on All Saints Day. How would you tie that in with All Saints? I mean, why is why is All Saints Day one of the days for baptisms?
Yeah, that right there, what sort of I was just saying is how I would tie that in. It's like, it is our baptism that unites us to the death and resurrection of Jesus. Like, we are ritually lowered to death with him and raised up. That really is the functional hinge point between between Good Friday and Easter, and all the people who were celebrating on All Saints Day, making it their own. Like, they were baptized into that ritually, and then they actually made good on that in their lives by actually taking up their cross, and then God displaying his glory through them in their lives. So that's absolutely what I would and have preached when we do baptisms on All Saints Day, which is like, mostly to the parents and godparents, it's like, hey, you are entering this person into a life of death and resurrection. You're baptizing them into their own sainthood. Like, like we celebrate St. Francis Day and St. Alfred Day. It actually kind of put it backwards, which is like, in this sermon, I'm kind of like taking these exalted saints and like breaking it down for us. I do it backwards almost, where it's like I'm taking this little baby and saying, like, this is going to be Saint Elizabeth. Like, we are baptizing her into her sainthood. You need to be an example for her, like St. Francis, so that she can be an example to us of the resurrection life, because we can't ever see it in ourselves. Like, bringing it back to Paul, like, the hand needs the eye. We need each other to see what the resurrection life looks like, so that we can be doing it in our day to day. So
I think All Saints Day, obviously, is also a time to remember the dead who are close to our hearts. Not just famous people in the church's history, but the saints of our own life. Our grandparents, or whoever it was who made a huge impression on you. And I think, the church calendar is set up how it is for a reason.
Yeah.
And I think, with the changing of the seasons right now, with autumn, you feel that kind of poignancy of like loss,
Yes.
And
absolutely.
I think for me, fall feels like a time when that veil between this life and the next is thin, and that's why we have Halloween, All Hallows Eve, and the spooky, it's like we can touch the spiritual world a little bit in this season. So I think, for me, All Saints Day always chokes me up, because it reminds me of everyone that I've lost, but who are still so powerfully present. And that's what's so amazing. It's like you're saying, they brought that resurrection, into today. Yeah. And so even the people who we love but see no longer, like, that love is just as powerful. And it just gives me chills, singing for all the saints, and thinking about all the people of my life who went before me, and who have gone before me not only in life but in death. And, thinking about, like, seeing them again, or seeing them for the first time in some cases. Like, I don't know, I think that's it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a whole other angle you can take on All Saints Day too, is like the cloud of witnesses.
Yeah.
And I just love that so much. All through the year, really. It's like, even when we're doing like a small midweek service, like, I like to imagine there's no empty pews in the church when you're having communion. Like, we're all there. And yeah, I really feel that. And
I think that reminds me too that the saints are always a good fallback for preaching.
Yes.
Like, if you can't think of your illustration or your image, you open up Holy Women, Holy Men, and find a saint who exemplified that, because their stories are always fascinating and, make for good preaching and good storytelling. So
it's so true.
And then there's a ready-made, connection to the gospel, obviously. So it's a good resource.
Actually, preaching the saints on Wednesdays on the midweek service has helped. Not me. I've never done this myself, but like, at the last minute, if someone is like, oh, no image, it's like, oh, the saint for this week, and the only people who will know are the midweek service.
4 people came to the Wednesday service.
11.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. No, but you're so right. Like, you can always go to a saint as an illustration for something.
Well, thank you, Eric.
You're very welcome.
Thank you all for watching.
Yeah, thank you.
And happy sermon writing.
Yes.